Hello, fellow storytellers and history buffs. Before sharing this tale from the dusty trails of the Wild West, I would like to ask, are there any of you who have relatives who lived through those legendary times? Grandfathers, great-grandfathers, great-grandmothers, or distant cousins who witnessed the harsh life on the frontier? If so, please share their stories in the comments below. It is very important to remember and honor our ancestors who carved out their lives from the harsh wilderness. Now let me take you back to the hot summer of 1887, to a forgotten place on the map called Perdition Creek. The copper bell above the door of the Coyote Desert Saloon rang with a familiar melody as another bush rolled past the dilapidated porch. Dust danced in the amber rays of the late sun, streaming through the dirty windows and casting long shadows on the worn wooden floor. Behind the red wooden bar, polishing a whiskey glass with practiced precision, stood Constance Hartwell, though few in Perdish Creek knew her real name. To the handful of residents of this God-forsaken town, she was simply Connie's widow, a woman who had buried 3 husbands and attracted letters from lonely men across America, like moths to a flame. However, what was whispered behind closed doors was much more sinister. They called her the Black Widow, a woman whose pen was mightier than any six-shooter, whose honeyed words in carefully crafted letters had lured more than one unsuspecting soul into financial ruin. Constance was 45 years old, with jet-black hair streaked with premature gray, which she combed into an elaborate Gibson girl hairstyle. Her emerald eyes were so deep that they could promise salvation or threaten damnation, depending on her mood. She was dressed in a burgundy velvet gown with an intricate beaded pattern, too dressy for a frontier saloon, but perfectly suited to the image she had created for herself, that of a sophisticated woman in distress, deserving of rescue by a gallant gentleman. The saloon itself was a monument to faded grandeur. Red velvet curtains, now moth-eaten and faded from the sun, hung from tarnished brass rods. In the corner stood a silent piano, its keys yellowed like old teeth. The mirror behind the bar was cracked with a web of cracks, as if someone in a moment of despair had thrown a bottle at their reflection. Only 6 people lived in Perdition Creek: Constance, old blacksmith Pete, seamstress Martha, Dr. Clemens, who drank more than he practiced medicine, Sheriff Wade, who had long since lost his enthusiasm for law enforcement, and young Timothy, who swept the floor of the saloon in search of nickels and dreamed of escape. For several months, Constance had been corresponding with a certain James Mitchell, a rancher from Colorado, who claimed to own a large herd of cattle. His letters arrived like clockwork every 2 weeks, delivered by a postman who stopped in Perdition Creek more out of a sense of duty than necessity. James wrote about lonely evenings spent watching the sun set over his vast holdings, about his desire to find a companion, and about his willingness to share his fortune with the right woman. He wrote beautifully, chose his words carefully, and, most importantly, his bank references checked out when Constance discreetly ran him through her network of acquaintances. James did not know that Constance had been perfecting this special art for over 10 years. She started with small requests: money for medicine for a sick relative, funds to repair the roof of the salon after a hurricane, loans to pay overdue taxes. Each amount was modest, reasonable, accompanied by promises to repay and expressions of deep gratitude. Then came larger sums: investment opportunities requiring immediate capital investment, urgent operations requiring expensive specialists, legal problems requiring expensive lawyers. By the time her victims realized they were being systematically fleeced, Constance had vanished like smoke in the wind, leaving behind only empty buildings and broken hearts. But James Mitchell was different. In his letters, he wrote that he was going to come, see Perdish Creek with his own eyes, and meet the woman who had captured his imagination. Constance tried to dissuade him with stories about the remoteness of the town, the dangers of the journey, and the primitive living conditions. But his determination only seemed to grow stronger, and in the end she realized she had no choice but to prepare for his arrival. In the morning, when James Mitchell rode into Perdish Creek on a dust-covered bay mare, the sun was already beating down mercilessly despite the early hour. He was younger than Constance had expected, no more than 25, with sun-bleached chestnut hair and eyes the color of a winter sky. His clothes were well-tailored but worn from travel, leather pants over woolen trousers, a cotton shirt that had once been white, and boots that testified to many miles spent in the stirrups. He carried himself with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to hard work and even harder decisions. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat as he approached the saloon door, "I'm looking for Miss Constance Hartwell. I believe she works at the Coyote Desert Saloon." Constance felt her carefully laid plans crumble like sand in an hourglass. Standing before her was not the elderly, desperate widower she had imagined from his letters, but an energetic young man whose presence seemed to fill the entire saloon. There was such intelligence in his eyes when they met hers that she suddenly felt uncomfortable. "It's me," she replied, adjusting her skirt and forcing herself to smile as warmly as possible. "And you must be James. Your letters don't do you justice." In the days that followed, James proved to be a mystery wrapped in cowboy leather. He took the best room in the only boarding house in town, bought drinks for all the locals, and seemed genuinely interested in the history and prospects of Perdish Creek. He praised Constance's beauty with the ease of an experienced flirt, but his compliments seemed calculated rather than spontaneous. He knew a lot about cattle ranching, mining investments, and local politics, but something in his manner suggested that these topics were not close to his heart. Constance began her usual game of subtle financial manipulation. She mentioned the saloon's growing debts, the need for repairs after the last hurricane, and her fears that supplies would not last through the coming winter. James listened with obvious concern, asked thoughtful questions, and promised to think about how he could help. But the expected offer of financial assistance never came. Instead, he offered practical solutions, which suppliers might offer more favorable credit terms, how the saloon could be reorganized to increase efficiency, how to attract travelers from the main cattle route that passed 20 miles to the north. On the third evening, as they sat on the saloon porch, watching the stars appear in the desert like scattered diamonds, James finally revealed his cards. "You know, Constance," he said, a note of sharpness in his voice, "I've been thinking about your letters. All these months of correspondence, and you never once mentioned that Perdish Creek is a dying town with a population of 6. Constance felt the water freeze in her stomach, despite the desert heat. I didn't want to discourage you from coming. Sometimes a place seems smaller than it really is. 6 people, Constance. I counted. And I also checked with the county clerk in Colorado Springs before I left. It turns out there are quite a few lonely men who have received similar letters from different women in small towns out west. Women who always need money. Women who disappear when the law starts asking questions." A silence fell between them, as if a snake had frozen, preparing to strike. Constance quickly ran through all the possible options in her mind: denial, seduction, escape. But something in James's manner suggested that he was several moves ahead in this game. "What do you want?" she finally asked. James smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "That's an interesting question, isn't it? You see, I'm not really a farmer from Colorado. I'm a detective with the Pinkerton Agency, and I've been looking for the Black Widow for almost 2 years. You're very good at covering your tracks, Constance, but you made one mistake. You used the same banker's references in 3 different states, and that banker happens to be my cousin." This revelation hit Constance like a physical blow. Everything she had built, every carefully constructed persona, every planned escape route, it all collapsed in an instant. But even as panic gripped her throat, her mind continued to work, calculating options and possibilities. "So you're here to arrest me," she said, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. "That was the plan," James admitted, "but after spending a few days here, watching you, I realized something. You're not just a common criminal, Constance. You're an artist. The way you compose these letters, create images, weave intricate stories, it's remarkable, almost admirable, if it weren't for all the lives you've destroyed." "Then what do you propose?" James leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and stared at the distant horizon. "I'm offering you a partnership. The Pinkerton Agency needs someone with your talents. There's bigger prey than lone farmers, con artists, embezzlers, corrupt politicians, people who have stolen far more than you from those who cannot afford it." Constance studied his profile in the starlight, searching for the trap she knew must be hidden somewhere in his words. "And if I refuse? Then I'll arrest you, and you'll be hanged for the murder of William Kendrick in Arizona." "Yes, I know about poor William. He was found dead in a hotel room 3 days after he handed over all his savings to a mysterious woman named Catherine Walsh. The coroner said it was a heart attack, but the Pinkertons know better. Digitalis in whiskey. Very clever, very difficult to detect." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Constance was careful, very careful, but apparently not careful enough. William Kendrick was her only mistake, the only one who got too close to the truth and threatened to turn her in to the authorities if she didn't give him his money back. She had no choice, or so she told herself at the time. "He was going to destroy me," she whispered. "And now I can destroy you," James replied. "But I'd rather save you, work with the agency, use your skills for something useful, and I'll make sure certain pieces of evidence disappear. Carry on as before, and I'll see you hanged." For 3 days, Constance struggled with this decision. She wandered the dusty streets of Perdition Creek, sat in the desert watching the vultures circle overhead, and lay sleepless in her small room above the saloon, listening to the wind moan in the eaves. James gave her freedom, spent time talking to other residents, helped Pete fix a broken wagon wheel, played checkers with Doc Clemens, and even taught little Timothy how to play pool. It was while watching him with Timothy that Constance finally made up her mind. The boy was probably 12 years old, all elbows and enthusiasm, desperately in need of adult attention in a town where he was practically invisible. James treated him with genuine kindness, not the calculated charity Constance saw in his behavior toward others. For a moment, she caught a glimpse of what James Mitchell might have been if he hadn't been James Mitchell, Pinkerton detective, playing a role. On the 4th day, she found him in the pre-dawn darkness, saddling a horse. "Leaving?" she asked. He turned, and in the light from the stable lamp, she saw something like regret in his expression. "I'm giving you a head start. My job was to find you, and I've done that. What happens next? Well, that's between you and your conscience. What about the evidence? The things that could get me convicted?" James secured his saddlebags and checked his rifle. "They'll be filed away in the agency archives and forgotten, unless you give them a reason to remember." Constance moved closer, so close she could smell his leather, sage, and the lingering scent of his cologne. "Why?" "Because I've seen what this life does to people. The lies, the manipulation, the constant fear of being exposed. It destroys you, Constance. I see it in your eyes, in the way you flinch at shadows, in the way you plan your escape routes from every room you walk into. You're brilliant, beautiful, but inside, you're completely empty. I don't want to be responsible for extinguishing what little spark is left in you." As the sun rose over the eastern mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, James Mitchell rode out of Perdition Creek. Constance watched from the porch of the saloon until he disappeared into the shimmering haze then slowly returned inside to begin planning her own departure. But in those 4 days, something had changed. For the first time in many years, someone had penetrated all her masks and offered her not condemnation, but choice. The weight of that gift, and the trust it implied, enveloped her like a mantle she wasn't sure she deserved to wear. 2 weeks later, the postman delivered a letter from Perdish Creek. It was addressed to the Pinkerton Detective Agency in Chicago, written in elegant feminine handwriting, and began, "Gentlemen, I understand that you may need someone with my particular skills. The stories of our ancestors, their struggles, their choices, their redemption, and their failures, shape us as individuals. They remind us that every person, no matter how lost, has the potential for transformation. In remembering the Black Widow of Coyote Desert, we honor not only her story, but all the forgotten souls who walked the dusty trails of the American frontier. Take a moment to sign up and share your family stories. Remember those who came before us. They deserve more than names on weathered headstones. Their blood runs through our veins, their dreams echo in our hearts, and their legacy lives on in our choices today. Don't let their stories die with the desert wind.